Hi, my name is Taisha Bonet. Here's my student ID. I'm going to be discussing about Chapter 8. In Chapter 8 of Prison Life, I have chosen to speak on the topic of prison violence and sexual assault and rape. Prior to reading this chapter, I was unaware of how serious and constant sexual assault and rape occur in prison. However, after reading this chapter, I have definitely gained much knowledge, much needed knowledge on prison life. In this chapter, I have learned that according to the Eighth Amendment, prison officials have a duty to keep inmates safe from violence by other prisoners. Though, unless the prisoners can prove that an assault had been made on them, prison staffs are not liable, which I feel that is unfair. Due to the lack of evidence, prisoners may or may not have when and if sexually assaulted and or raped. According to Chapter 8, researchers have pointed out that about 90% of these assaults on inmates are not reported to prison officials. I honestly would have never guessed such a high percentage rate for sexual assaults and rapes going unreported in prison. Now, going back to the Eighth Amendment, where prison officials have the duty to keep prisoners safe from violence against each others, and so on. Though, in the past, sexual harassment and acts of staff sexual misconduct had few, if any, negative consequences at all. But in this entire chapter, what I found to be most shocking is the fact that most incidents of sexual abuse are not from one inmate to another, but rather from a staff member to an inmate. In the past and still today, any sexual behavior between inmate and inmate, or especially a staff member to an inmate, has always been prohibited. Whether the sexual conduct was consensual or non consensual, it's always been prohibited. Yet, it still occurs. Inmate victims targeted for sexual assault and rape are usually the fresh meat youngies, as I call them. In other words, the young first timers in prison. Others often targeted are those who are mentally ill or in some way disabled, along with the characteristics of an individual's of an inmate of individual inmates, and how others perceive them can also make the inmate a potential targeted victim. In this chapter, I've learned that it wasn't until 2003 that the Prison Rape Elimination Act became to be. The goal of this act was to reduce the sexual assaults and rapes on inmate prisoners, and better protect them. The Prison Rape Elimination Act created guidelines in hopes that these guidelines would provide better protection for the inmates, prisoners from rape. According to my readings, this act included staff training on the new law, a zero tolerance policy of sexual misconduct and rape incidents, and victim access to counseling and protective custody housing. Since the past and currently today, I feel this act, and I'm sure many more that have come to be, have made prisons a safer environment, for prison inmates, and have better trained correctional officers. So, thank you for listening to my speech on Chapter 8.